Mike Ford is the Go and Be pastor at Cornwall Church in Bellingham, Washington. And now more than ever, both the local and global church must find innovative ways to reach people and make disciples. Listen in as we talk about innovation in the church through the lens of vending machines and food sources. Welcome to a World of Good podcast. I'm Nate Tatman.
And I'm Andrew Gale.
And we are two friends
who love Jesus,
care about the church,
and travel the world to share stories of people who do the same.
Our conversations happen in all kinds of places.
Like a coffee shop and an airport terminal.
Or even the back of a crowded taxi.
But no matter where we go, from Argentina to Zimbabwe,
we capture stories of the good God is doing around the world.
And we hope those stories will do you a world of good. Welcome today to a World of Good podcast. My name is Andrew Gale, and I'm here with my co-host, Nate Tatman, who is purposefully doing this podcast from a balcony overlooking the mountains in Colorado.
Absolutely.
While I sit in my little lair in the recesses of my house. So, yeah, not fair again.
Well, you know, I don't know what to say to that other than, from my perspective, it is completely fair.
It looks beautiful there. You have a beautiful day. I mean, it's November, but you have the sun out. I mean, it looks like it's very nice.
It has been. It's been a great week. Last week, we were down in the 40s. This week, it's been in the 50s and 60s. And, you know, I learned something. You know, when you think of Colorado, or at least when I have thought of Colorado, I have thought of cold, snow, especially in November. You know, and bitter cold.
No, you were worried about that.
Oh, absolutely.
You were worried.
Yeah.
You actually talked about that
we
here.
Did.
You were very worried about going to Colorado and it being really terrible.
Come to find out, Colorado gets sun 300 days out of the year. And so more often than not, even in the cold months, they have a blue, sunny sky here. And the snow usually, again, when you're up in the mountains, it's a different story. But, you know, where I'm at here in Palmer Lake, just north of Colorado Springs, kind of in the valley region, the snow does not stick around very long. So it's a beautiful day, blue sky, sun is out.
Absolutely.
As a reminder, you can follow us on Twitter at A World of Good Pod, and I am constantly putting out articles that as I come across for our In the News or for my In the News segment, constantly putting them out there. You can also find us at Instagram and search for A World of Good Podcast. We also post updates to the Global Strategy Facebook page. And when Andrew can remember, we also put our full episodes on the Global Strategy Facebook page. Are they? Good job. Good job.
Yeah, I know. I did it.
And we also have a website where you can learn information about the podcast and listen to the episodes online at chogglobal.org/podcast. And you can also, on that page, you can look for an opportunity to get these new episodes in your email inbox every 2 weeks, every Monday morning. So there's lots of ways to connect with us, as we always want to hear from you, our listeners. And I also want to give a reminder, if this has been beneficial for you, if you have found this interesting, insightful, or absolutely ridiculous, whatever you fancy, can you please leave us a review? It definitely helps. It helps get our podcast in front of more people. So if you would, please do that. And Andrew, what do you have for Coffee Talk?
Now for Coffee Talk.
So my question today, you know, we've been asking questions of like, you know, where's your coffee from? Understanding, you know, how it's grown, those kind of pieces. Today, it's how do we brew? So as we start to think about where our coffee comes from, we also want to think about how we want to brew our coffee for different flavors. So again, we've talked about different coffee beans from different regions, have different flavor profiles, but also different cultures and different countries have unique brewing methods as well. So many of us, including me, maybe use a coffee pot, which is a fine way to make your coffee if that's the way you want to do it.
Especially if you want lots of coffee.
Yeah, if you want lots of coffee, if you want to do it quickly and easy, it's an easy cup of coffee for sure. And again, I do that. Every morning I make a pot of coffee that my wife and I share together. Many of you that listening may have a Keurig as well or something like that. It's another quick and easy way to make coffee. But again, the way we make it matters. And so one common way to brew coffee that gives kind of more control over the flavor is a French press. It's one of my favorite brewing methods. It's a really simple brewing method. And for those that are used to doing a Keurig or used to doing a coffee pop, this is a great way to stretch yourself into trying a new way of brewing coffee. So you can buy a cheap French press for about $15. You use coarse ground coffee. You add boiling water, and it's just under boiling water. You want it about 200 degrees. Boiling's at 212, so let it sit for about a minute after you boil it. You let that coffee and water steep for 4 to 5 minutes. You use the plunger top that comes with it to plunge it down, and you have a delicious cup of coffee. So the question that comes is why? Why would you take the time to do that? Well, the positives of a French press is that you get the oils from the beans. So beans, when they're roasted, preserve those oils, and when you grind it, you want to be able to taste those oils. They're packed with delicious flavor. Now, when you use a coffee filter, and especially a paper filter, those oils actually get trapped on that paper filter, and so you don't get all of the flavor that you could. Fresh Prince. Fresh Prince. I know I said Fresh Prince.
It sounded like you were saying Fresh Prince.
French presses aren't expensive. All you need is the press, boiling water, and coarse ground coffee. So if you've never had a different brewing method, this is a great way to do it. At Global Strategy, we actually do a French press every morning. But it's a way that we enjoy coffee together at Global Strategy. It's a great way to stand around, make the press together, have a conversation. And so I just encourage you. There are lots of great ways to make coffee where you get more control than your simple Keurig that you use. So an AeroPress, which I know is the way you use, Nate, right? You use an AeroPress?
Yes. So you mentioned the positive aspects of using a French press. Let me share with our audience the negative.
Yeah, share the negative. That's fine.
So here's why I do not like a French press. So I'm completely in agreement with you on, you get the oils, it tastes better, all that kind of stuff. The problem is you get down, to the bottom of that. You do not want to drink at the end of a French press because it is very oily and the sludge and all that. But then there's the cleanup. Now, Stacy says it's an easy cleanup. I don't agree with her. I think it is an easy cleanup. I think it's a messy cleanup. I like the AeroPress because I think it's an easier cleanup, and I don't know. For me, the French press is still too much work.
It is work, but it's easier than some of the other methods maybe that people do, and it's a great way if you've started drinking coffee, you want to explore other things. It's a really good kind of entry level way of exploring different ways to make coffee. So the French press, you use AeroPress. There's pour overs. There's a Costa Rican version of a pour over that's done through something that looks like a sock. It's delicious. It's called a chorreador. I have one here that I use and one at my office that I use sometimes. If I want a really strong cup of coffee, you can do a mocha pot or an espresso pot. That's more of kind of an Italian style of coffee. But again, I mention all of this because Christmas is coming. Christmas is coming. And so as you think about what you might want to ask for Christmas, I think it's a great opportunity to say, hey, I'd love to try something different in the realm of coffee. So I'd love to get a French press and then just try it. They're so inexpensive. They're so easy to use. A little bit more cleanup. But again, if you're gardening, those grounds are great for your garden.
That's a good point.
See, we save ours for our garden. But there are so many options.
Yeah. Finding
ethically sourced beans and then try a new way of brewing the coffee. What's in the news, Nate?
Well, today's article is from the Christian Post, dated November 14th, 2020, and it was entitled Declining Birth Rates Linked to Secularization, Growing Hostility Toward Religion, and it was by Brandon Showalter. So naturally, I became very curious about that title. It kind of caught me off guard, actually. And as I started digging into this article, I remembered hearing about this book. It's from a book written by Philip Jenkins, who has published numerous books. He's a professor at Baylor University. He also is a co-director of the program on historical studies of religion. He's written The Next Christendom, The Lost History of Christianity, The New Faces of Christianity. If you have not heard or read anything by Philip Jenkins, you need to, especially if you are digging into just global Christianity and Christian history, that sort of thing.
Yeah, The Next Christendom is one of those books that we recommend people read before going on the field. We have it on our list of books. It's a fantastic book, and absolutely his thoughts on where Christianity is going have turned out to be very true, the way that he processed that and shares that. So 100% good book to jump into.
So his most recent book, which was actually published earlier this year in July, is called Fertility and Faith: The Demographic Revolution and the Transformation of World Religions. And man, I don't know. I was kind of stunned at first. I'm like, how in the world can these two different things connect with each other? But I'm fascinated, and now I'm going to have to pick this book up because, so he did a live stream entitled Fertility and Faith, and this article was based on that live stream. And here's some of the things that he said. He said, "We measure change in a society through fertility. There's a close correlation between a fertility rate of a particular society or nation and the level of religious involvement or participation in that society." He goes on to say, amid the relatively recent collapse in fertility rates around the world, especially in Europe, which kind of piqued my interest, secularization is rising. Jenkins noted that if you told him the fertility rate of any given country, it would be fairly easy to say whether that nation allows legal same-sex unions, surmise its attitudes toward faith and religion, and how strong its religious institutions are. And while this correlation is not brought about by simple causation, the link is nevertheless demonstrably present, he stressed. In this article, he goes on and gives examples from different countries, different religious countries, how their birth rates have dropped the more secular those countries have become, such as Denmark, Italy, and even Iran, or the opposite has taken place in countries like Uganda. And so just kind of ending this, he says that low fertility societies are more likely to be hostile to religion. And the key factor is this phenomenon in the institutions. Once you separate the idea of family, take away the institution of family, once you separate sexuality and reproduction, people become a lot less willing to have churches or religious institutions tell them what to do with their personal lives. So it was kind of fascinating. You know, as most of our listeners know, I think we're going to be moving to Spain and doing ministry in Europe and the Middle East. And so this is an aspect, you know, there's many implications here in terms of, wow, obviously we know many of these countries in Europe are secularized or have been secularizing over the decades. But what does that also then mean to the family and the institution of family? And so it really piqued my interest, and I thought that you would find it interesting. Hopefully our listeners would find it interesting as well.
What a fascinating article, and what an interesting book. I'd love to read more and dig more into what he's processing there. You know, one of the things I always love to do, if there's a book that interests me and I'm not quite sure I want to dig into, I mean, Philip Jenkins' books are good. They're very academic, though, and they can be overbearing, a little much for people. And so one of the things that can be helpful is...
You have to pace yourself.
You do. And one of the things you can do to kind of get the best of a book is to go and see if that same author wrote an academic article before writing the book. Lots of authors write academic articles, and then somebody picks that up and says, oh, I love this idea. You should flesh this out into a book. And then it becomes a book. Miroslav Volf wrote his book, Exclusion and Embrace, but he first wrote an article about it before he wrote the book. And so if you want to get the main themes, you can go pick up Volf's article, which is, 25 to 30 pages, or you can pick up his 300-page book, and both of them have the similar content. He just fleshes it out more in the book. And so I always found that to be a really helpful, it was a recommendation from one of my professors, if you want to read an entire book, go for it, but you can also get a lot of the same content by looking at an article. So I want to go see if Jenkins maybe has this as an academic article before he wrote the book that might give that same kind of content. Shared
by somebody who has gone on to get their doctorate. You have learned how to work around the system, have you not?
Work smarter, not harder. Work smarter, not
thank
harder.
You for that
That's
tidbit.
right.
That is something that I've never thought of or considered or even knew existed. So I'm gonna do that first. On today's episode, I am interviewing Mike Ford, who serves as the Go and Be pastor at Cornwall Church in Bellingham, Washington. And Mike did a presentation, Andrew. This would have been a little over a year ago in Bellingham at our Missions Pastors Roundtable. And he did this presentation on vending machines versus food sources. And I think you and I, we kind of talked a little bit about this and thought, man, that was fascinating. We want to interview Mike about that because he brings in this whole idea of innovation and how the church has to continually be innovating. And especially in this season of COVID, we have to be innovative in our approach and what we're doing, and many churches are there. And so Mike has given us some language and a picture of what innovation could look like in comparing basically the vending machines through the food sources. And I'm already saying way too much and don't want to give any more insights into what Mike is already going to be giving us. So listen in on this interview, and I hope you find it as beneficial as we have. Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good. So I am here in Bellingham, Washington with Mike Ford. Mike, this is my second time here. I love being here. I love being with you and with your team. And maybe just give us a little bit of an introduction of who you are, a little bit about your background, and what your ministry context is right now.
Sure. I'm one of the pastors at Cornwall Church. So I've been here since 2005. And my background is just different, like all of us. So my background is engineering. I have a degree in industrial engineering. So before I became a pastor, I worked as an engineer. So I like to apply some of those kind of thoughts or processes into what I do here. My role here is the Go and Be pastor. So Go and Be here is part of a 3-part integrated strategy. We have Come and See, which is really what happens at the weekends. We have Community, which is your serving teams, small groups, anything that is about life on life, building into each other and the importance of community. And then Go and Be is anything outside the walls, and that's both local and global.
Yeah. And so then you've been here you've been on staff now for about 15 years then.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right. Man, you've experienced a lot in the last 15 years.
Well, and in the first, say, 12 years, I was the children's pastor. So I worked with kids.
That's right.
And
I
families,
forgot about that.
And that was just, I loved that.
Yeah.
And then, so I transitioned on staff into a new position, and that's the Go and Be position.
I had completely forgotten about that. Yeah, so that we'll save that for another day. I'm sure there's some stories there that you can share. But you and I have gotten to know each other for about the last few years or so, primarily with the Missions Pastors Roundtable that Global Strategy has put on. You visited County Line, my home church, and again, I think that was a roundtable 2 years ago, and then last year we were out here for a roundtable here that you hosted. And when we were here, you talked a little bit about some of the things that you were wrestling with, some of the things that you were thinking through, implementing, and doing here at Cornwall. And the picture that you kind of painted was very interesting. I think it captivated a lot of our minds and thoughts, and just kind of envisioning what that looked like. You painted a very clear picture for us, and it was centered around innovating change in the church, and obviously through your context as the Go and Be pastor, and locally, and local missions and global missions. Maybe just talk a little bit about innovating change at a high level. Why is that interesting to you? I'm assuming you picked up some principles as an engineer that you have brought into the local church context. Maybe just share a little bit about how does that work in a local church and with missions and outreach?
Well, I think part of it is that, don't you think that the church should be the most innovative institution around?
Absolutely.
I mean, we should, because we're not bound by fear or, that shouldn't be part of it. So I love innovation. And I think it's a way for us to just view the world and see the potential of what God is doing. And when you take like novel and useful ideas, and then you try to you successfully implement those ideas, that's what innovation is really about. Because some people can have ideas, but then they can't implement them. And then some people love to implement, but they're old ideas. So I think that's the core of it. And right now, during this whole COVID journey, it's either we wish and dream everything was back the way it was, or we innovate.
Yeah.
And maybe we need to innovate anyway, really.
Yeah.
Maybe some of the ideas are stale and they're not accomplishing what we think they're accomplishing. So I think during this journey, even if it's been hard, it allows us the opportunity to look at life, at church, at mission in a whole new way and approach it. And to really do that, you have to be willing to challenge the status quo, to go, is this okay? There are people that are stuck in who am I listening to and who am I approaching and who speaks into me. And to challenge the status quo means, okay, if it's not working, it's not working. And we have to be willing to do something about it. And then taking smart risks is a big part of innovation. So I think those are the groundwork. We have to have the courage to innovate, and we have to face that not everyone's going to be pleased. But the mission calls us to a greater calling of our lives really impacted. Is the kingdom really being built here, or is it just more comfortable, or we listen to people that are complaining? What really is driving us? So I think part of it is first saying, do we have the courage to move forward? And during COVID, we really have to.
Yeah.
We really have to.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing with that, I've got a lot of different thoughts running through my mind right now, but when you look at the global church, as I have traveled and visited different countries and attended worship services in those different countries, by and large, our worship services are the same across any culture. And my guess is they look the same, or they have looked the same for the last 20, 30, 50, 60 years. There hasn't really been a lot of innovation in our churches as it pertains to our Sunday morning gatherings, maybe in our weekly services, whether it's a midweek service or maybe small groups. If anything, going through this COVID has really brought up this idea of what happens when the church can't gather together. And going back to something you said, is this a time where we try to push forward and push ahead with maybe some of the old things that we were doing and trying to implement and stay the course with those? Or is it time to innovate, to think through things differently, to gather differently, to think about our gatherings and things like that?
Yeah, and I think the big part is, what is the church for? That's the question we need to ask. Not what is the church, but what is it for? And that can drive us to some very innovative kind of thinking. Because I think for such a long time, the church was for a weekend service.
Yeah.
And yes, I believe that gathering together is absolutely important, is very important. But why?
Yep.
It's because we as a church can make an impact in those around us, and the way we love, the way we care, that we become more about what we are for than what we're against.
Yeah.
And I just think it's a new day in this situation. If we do it the same way we've always done it, then there will be a group of people that desperately need the gospel that are just turned off because they just think, okay, they're just gathering. Do they really care?
Yep.
So I think the innovation is, let Christ followers live out the calling that God's given them.
Yeah.
That God is at work all around us. And as the Holy Spirit leads us, as Christ followers, we step into it. That to me is a journey than the other way around.
Yeah. And again, I haven't lived here in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest. However, research and stories or information that I've heard either from you or from other pastors, this is in a context or a culture that has a context that leans more secular, leans more liberal, probably leans a little bit more, I don't know, would you say anti-church?
I think in this culture, it's not anti-church, even though there's anti-institution.
Okay.
And the church is included in that. I think it's more relevancy. Like the church is not even relevant. I don't think even people are thinking that when they're going through situations or that they would even go to church.
Yeah.
I think that's the culture I live in.
Yeah.
Here, it's just like, I'm going to have marriage issues, marriage problems. where do I go? They wouldn't even think of the church.
Go to a therapist.
Yes. Go to friends.
Maybe
go to
a friend.
Watch a video or something.
Yeah.
But their first connection is not the church anymore. And so I think that's just reality where we are. Now, with that has great opportunity, because we don't, in the Northwest, we do not live in a Christian culture.
Mm-hmm.
So it mixes up being a Christ follower with just, this is the way my family lived. This is the way I was raised. Therefore, I'm just going to do these things.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change a heart.
Yeah.
Here, it changes hearts, because once you are a follower of Jesus, it changes the way you behave and the way you live.
Yeah. And I think too, there are implications to that in terms of living in a maybe more of a secularized culture that doesn't look at Christianity or as the church for answers. For those who are part of the church, in some ways, and again, maybe I'm projecting something that's not there, so correct me if I'm wrong, but in some ways, does the church become kind of this fortress or this place that we want to insulate ourselves to the culture around us? Does that become part of the culture of the church as well?
I think traditionally that's what's happened.
Okay.
And I think that has not been good. I think what I see right now, and I see it here, but I think I see it in other places now, this idea that we can collaborate on a deeper level with our community than even ever before. If we come with the right attitude, if we come with the right posture. Again, we're a very liberal area we live in. The doors are wide open in so many different ways when we love well and we're not pushing an agenda. And so that's part of this innovation, is that, it's not just about us.
Yeah.
And so I think people read that now.
Yeah.
If they think, okay, why are you doing that? Are you just trying to get me to believe what you're believing? Are you just trying to push and build your church? And rightly so, there's skepticism. Because if we're just going to build a church, then I think we've lost our mission about building God's kingdom.
Absolutely.
So I think this is there.
Yeah.
The skepticism.
Yeah.
And if you break down that wall of skepticism, then impact, it just happens. It becomes more complicated because you have life-on-life discussions with people that believe very different than you, and you just still engage in these conversations because you love them, not because you go, I'm going to convince them.
Yeah, and that's where, to bring this back to what we were talking about with innovation.
Yep.
Again, you take Church A, First Church that's just down the street, and we're talking about Bellingham in the Pacific Northwest. You can probably pick that church up and place it in France or in Italy or someplace in Europe where, again, kind of a secularized culture, maybe a post-Christian culture, and kind of have that same mentality of where it's more inward focused, wanting to insulate from the outside. However, is that a biblical model of what church is and what church is for and who church is for? And so, I'm wanting to help our listeners to see that this is not just for an American church to think about innovation and change and how we're reaching our culture, but regardless of our context and our culture, it's something that we need to think through and to process and to begin asking some of those questions, challenging the status quo. What does that mean? What does that look like? And then again, within that same context, taking smart risks.
Yeah.
So,
well, and when you start questioning and you start, observing around you, and you start talking, even a podcast is part of networking, you start networking, and then you start having these experiments and trying things. It kind of leads to this idea that you can associate things that are not necessarily common, and you think, how do they apply here? Okay, and I've talked to you guys about this idea with a vending machine. So if I think about a vending machine, I think about a place that someone chose to put all the items in there, and someone has chosen the cost of each item. You put your nickels, dimes, quarters, and you push a button, and out comes a candy bar.
Yeah.
But someone has determined that that's the location, that's the cost, that's how much it makes to make a profit. And there's nothing wrong with a vending machine. But if you only ate from a vending machine, how healthy would you be?
Yeah, not very healthy.
Not very healthy. And you're also at the whims of somebody else. You're letting someone else decide for you what's best. And if I eat only from a vending machine, I would be unhealthy and I would be bored. I'd be like, oh, I can't, I wish I had something different. I wish I had something like more substantial. And I think part of it is that's kind of where our church is right now. That if we're not careful, we've treated the church like a vending machine. And we have people that attend church that are both bored and they're unhealthy. And as pastors, as leaders, we've often determined this is their path for growth. This is their trip, and this is the cost of that trip, and here's that event, and just do this event, and you know what? You'll become a healthy individual. And I think it doesn't work in the real life, in the real world.
Yeah.
Like a vending machine. Why would we think it works in the church?
Yep.
So it becomes controlling. Like, I'm the leader, I should know. Therefore, the pastor should determine what should happen. And it's with good hearts. I mean, we've done this for years in the church. We've determined what is best for our congregation. We've determined how someone should grow, what to do, and the steps, all the steps along the way.
Yeah.
And we've counted how many people go to this event, therefore I'm successful.
Yep.
It comes back to us.
Yep.
Now, I don't think it's all with bad intentions. It's just...
And it didn't start out that way.
No.
It started out, like you were saying, it started out with good intentions, but it's somehow morphed into this, what you would call a more consumeristic type of approach to church, where, again, the staff, the pastors, the leadership of the church is saying, these are the products, and again, we're speaking in more of a negative connotation, but, at the end of the day, these are the products, these are the things that we feel are going to best help somebody in their spiritual growth and walk with Christ. However, we have now come to the point where it's presented in such a way that these are the answers to your life's problems, without taking time to ask what your problems are, what are the things you're facing, things that are happening in your life that you need in order to grow, to become more Christ-like.
Yeah, and like this illustration, I'm not against vending machines. I use them. If I want a soda, vending machine's a great option. But I think what has led to is this hierarchical approach in the church, where he's the expert, he's the one. And again, if we redefine that God is at work all around us, he is at work in amazing ways. We don't even see it. And the Holy Spirit is leading us. And not just pastors or leaders, but as Christ followers. And if it's our responsibility to step into it, then we cannot treat this whole kingdom building business like a vending machine.
Yeah.
So I think when I think about the opposite, I think about all food sources. Okay. So like restaurants and grocery stores and co-ops and growing your own food, it's decentralized.
Yeah.
Or vending machine is centralized.
Yep.
It's location, who's doing it. It's decentralized. It's organic. It's not programmed. It's more like each individual, there really is an individual, and each family is a little different, and each culture is a little different. Each community is a little different. So it's not all, this fits for everybody. It's not predetermined. It's more like a blank canvas, like this platform that says, not predetermined outcomes. So it's harder as a leader because it's harder to evaluate what is success and what's not. If I'm counting cost and I'm counting people attending an event, that's easy. And it's easy to say, oh, that's successful. But if I'm thinking about Christ followers and it's a blank canvas, and as God leads, they move, I don't even know how to evaluate that. Once uncontrolled, there's a freedom there. Once I have created, so join me.
You're saying that as the pastor.
Yeah.
Something that I've created or
so join
done.
me.
So join me in.
Yeah, or I'm leading, you follow. We've given this message that says, I lead. I've created, so join me. Instead of let's create or you lead. That God's at work in your life like he's at work in my life. And in fact, you have more opportunities in some ways than I would in your place of work, in your home, in your neighborhood, in the way you live. So, there's just a lot of this kind of thing that I think we need to look at. Now, again, we put a negative spin on a vending machine idea. And I don't think it's negative in this sense. I think it needs to be both. the way I would look at it is that at Cornwall, we believe in this power of the plus. It's a vending machine and food sources. It is a vending machine idea and all food sources. We believe as the Holy Spirit leads, each Christ follower listens and responds. And some opportunities are presented like a vending machine, where it's both predetermined and predictable. We do that because I think sometimes you need to here's some ideas how you can live out your faith. That's important. And it's important for us to figure out what that looks like. And it could be something as simple as what we're doing about being in partnership with our schools, collecting food, going, hey, you could do this on your own, but we're going to do this collaboratively. We're going to do this together. That's good.
Yeah.
But the goal is always to encourage each individual to live out their own mission story, whether or not directly connected to the local church.
Yeah.
Again, what are we trying to build? That's the question. If we're trying to build a church, then a vending machine model works every time, if that's the goal. And my argument is, I don't think that's what we're trying to build. We're trying to build God's kingdom. And as Christ followers, we're all about that. And the church will grow. That's not, to me, that happens after that.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the conversations I've been having as I've been traveling around, speaking with different pastors, and some of the convictions that I've had as a pastor is this whole arena, or this whole biblical mandate of making disciples. I think, I've been in ministry now for 20 some years. I think it was kind of a model that I grew up on, and definitely a model that I presented, I worked within, I helped to create. But is really this idea of making disciples through programs of the church or the vending machines that we offer. This is how we are making and producing, if you will, disciples, rather than, instead of spending my time on creating programs that would make disciples, the conviction that I have is that I should have been making disciples who then make disciples. How can I equip disciples to make disciples, rather than, for example, inviting somebody to church, and that person who I'm inviting is now looking towards the church programs to help them grow in their faith, to grow in their relationship with Christ, by, again, going back to some of the things that you were talking about, attending a service or being a part of a small group or taking this class, rather than what would it look like if I was making disciples and equipping them and empowering them to learn how to make disciples. Yeah. Kind of this, going back to this, and like what you were saying, it's a both and. It's not an either or. Yeah. But how are we using our programs and ministries within the church to make disciples, but then also equipping those disciples to make disciples, and not leaning on or looking to the church to make disciples of my coworkers and friends and relatives.
Well, I think part of it it's personal, right? Mm-hmm. I think with leaders, the tendency, if we're not careful, is that becomes, I have my hat of leadership in the church, and then I have my own personal life.
Yeah.
So you cannot lead someone where you haven't gone. Mm. And I think that's the challenge, is that it has to become this personal journey that you're on, and I get it. It gets busy. You have demands. You got people calling you. But I think part of it is stepping back and what am I telling my congregation or people around me? And is this a core? I mean, is this what I breathe?
Yeah.
Is this how I live? And to be gracious with ourselves, going, we haven't arrived. Mm-hmm. It's okay. We're learning and growing. Mm-hmm. There's some things that we're saying that are still aspirational for us. Mm-hmm. But to be honest with it, saying, you know what? I believe this. I'm still working on it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's even encouraging, and says we're on the same page together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. It has to be personal first. But then I think we have to be able to say, include others on this. Like, is your mission, or the way you describe it, is that a department, or is that a culture? Hmm. So here, one of the things we say at Cornwall is that go and be, it is, every staff member is a go and be staff member in their sphere of influence. So it's really not about a person, it's about a way of living. Hmm. If it's about a way of living, then you include others, and you say, like, hey, the worship pastor, he's a mission pastor. really, in the sphere of influence. The children's pastor is a mission children's pastor in his sphere of influence. So it has to be done where it becomes culture instead of going, I'm pushing this agenda because it's a program with everybody and everyone has their own departments. You have to lower that and say, we're all on this together.
Yeah. Yeah. So going back to this picture, the vending machine plus food sources, just give me some, and you kind of talked about that culturally, how that plays out at Cornwall. What are some end results or outcomes of that type of innovation and culture at Cornwall? What have you seen? Maybe if you have a story to share or something like that.
I mean, I could think of several different things, but I'll give you one. We've done this community toy store, working with our whole community for the last few years, and it was where families were able to come into a location and actually purchase toys at a much reduced rate for their own families. Because a lot of times, families that are under-resourced, they're just given these toys. It in some ways undermines the parenting role. Yeah. With good hearts. So we created this place where we worked with the schools and families come in and they can buy the toys at really reduced rates, like 10%, 50%.
So are these toys, like, are these new toys?
Brand new toys that were
from local businesses?
Both. What we have here is we call it Cornwall at the Mall, where it's a whole community. We would come in and purchase toys for this cost. Okay, wow. So what's happened is that there has been some Christ followers. Part of Cornwall says, look, my community could do something like this. So on their own, with some guidance, that's what they did. It's not a Cornwall stamp thing. It's not something we're doing. So what they're doing is they see this idea and they see how it impacts families and just builds into families and feels like, okay, I'm not on this alone, and I have people that believe in me, and they're taking it to their own communities. And we're not funding it. They just say, look, this is something I'm going to do.
That's really cool.
So that's just one. I mean, I think it happens too with we'll call it impact trips or mission trips, where we had a one trip that was working with missionary kids, and we came back from that, and one of the persons on this team that worked with the missionary kids said, look, I need to go further with this. So now that person is writing letters and connecting constantly with the kids that she connected with. So part of it is that when you open it up, yes, the vending machine leads to food sources, but also the other way around. They're the ones building into it again. So it becomes a circle of impact. So it's not one or the other. Yeah. It's a combination of both. Yeah. And I could go on and on about those kind of things. Sure. But I think the bottom line is the recognition that God is at work around us. And that it is it's an individual journey that someone must take. And then creating enough ideas to say, look, you could do this. And we do this, what we're doing right now is we're starting to tell stories saying, look, as a Christ follower, embrace your job. And so we'll start describing how someone embraces their job and impacts people from their position, their job as a Christ follower, and how that story then becomes part of our DNA. And we start telling more stories because it's harder to track. Yeah, it is. It's not as quantifiable. It's not as quantifiable. Stories have a way to build culture. Absolutely. So again, your background going clear back to when you were doing industrial engineering and through your time at Cornwall being on staff and both as children's and going B, you've kind of had this innovating spirit, heart, things like that. We're living in a time right now with COVID and coronavirus, this global pandemic that is, again, upended things. I think as of today, this recording, you guys meaning Cornwall, you've been open for 3 weeks now in terms of your Sunday morning services. So you guys really extended your online presence, in solely your online presence until just recently. And that fits our culture here, right? Where if you're in the Midwest or other places, you might have opened much earlier. Yep. But in Bellingham, that's just
it wasn't a reality.
It just wasn't a
especially for a
reality.
larger church
Yeah.
like yours. So maybe just share a little bit about, again, nothing's probably permanent or concrete, or I know you've got some things in the works, but just what does it look like in a time for you in a time of COVID and this pandemic to think about innovation and change when there's so much uncertainty at this point?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, this has been a hard journey. I mean, it's been hard for all of us, right? And I remember, having all these plans and saying, look, all my plans, all the playbook, we kind of have to throw out the window.
Yeah.
It was like this, every trip, every plan that we had, it seems like it's done. It's over.
Yep.
And that's hard to release. And there were some personal disappointments in that, going, I can picture this being impactful and I'm so excited. And all of a sudden it's gone.
Well, it was, you were in the middle of a trip and it disappeared just like that.
It was in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Yes. And, yes.
You landed in Ukraine with your team. You were going to go to a seminary and what happened?
Well, we were teaching discipleship at Ukraine at Kiev Theological Seminary. And that was our goal. While we're in flight, let me put it that way, the Ukrainian government had to close down all schools. I mean, I think they had one case of COVID at that time. And so our whole mission was like out the window.
Yeah.
So
that's exactly what you were going there for, was to teach at a school.
So we connected in just a very different way, and it turned out to be amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, it was like the start of all these holding things loosely.
Yeah.
And so that's been part of that journey. How do you hold things loosely? I think our opportunities as a church are all around us in big ways now. I'll tell you a couple things. One is that the need is so great. It has allowed us to go deeper in collaboration with our public schools, and then community groups that are around it. We had a COVID community helpers that we collaborated with in several different ways that I don't know if we would have in the same way before.
Yeah.
Schools, they're trying to figure out how to get back to school, and the Bellingham public schools, and so I was able to sit on a team that said, look, let's just figure out how volunteerism works now. And so I was invited in that table, and I think sometimes as Christ followers, as leaders, being at the worst seat of the table, we're still at the table.
Yeah.
And I think we have to embrace the worst seat. Now, I don't know how to put worst seat. It's just like we're not in charge.
Yeah.
If we embrace that we're not in charge, then we can collaborate in a big way.
Yeah.
And we're finding that's what's happening now, is that especially with the school systems. I'll tell you one thing we're doing. We have a partnership with one of our local schools, and they have 70 staff at that school. And just talking to the principal, life is so difficult, not just for the students, but for the staff. They're trying to figure out how do they teach like second graders, and you have a teacher that has never met the students in her class face to face. How do you do that?
Yeah.
So the discouragement level is so high. So what we're doing now is that we have linked up every staff member at the school to a Christ follower at our church, and they're writing a letter every month.
That's really cool.
And so just be part of that encouragement.
Yeah.
For 7 months, we're going to be writing letters to that same person. So I have a 4th grade teacher that I'm writing letters to. And so I'm just writing letters every month, and I'll do it for the whole school year. And again, our approach is very respectful. So our encouragement letters, I'm not putting verses in there. Because that would be inappropriate for a public school system. So I'm just writing encouraging things, knowing that that's kingdom building when you come alongside those who are not are discouraged. Now, some stories might lead to, having a relationship, like goes beyond just writing letters. It might, and that's great. That's not our goal. Our goal is to encourage teachers, and so that's one kind of opportunity. We're seeing it and we're stepping into it.
Yeah.
And I think it's around us.
Yeah.
But how do we do it so we're not pushing an agenda, and we're not trying to build our local church? Like, we're not putting a stamp of Cornwall on that endeavor, because that is read here as that's the reason we're doing it.
Yeah.
It's not the reason we're doing it.
Yeah. That's
So I think
cool.
I think we'd have to look at our motives and how do we set it up? How do we do it? How do we come alongside that we're about our community and kingdom impact?
Is that what this is a little bit about, or do you have something specific to say with that? With this?
Sure.
Okay.
One of the thoughts, I'll throw out a different
Yeah.
that we're working on right now is, and some of you might, it's not new, but we recognize that if we're going to impact our community, that's a center. In the past, I think sometimes we think it's the church as the center. But I think if we think about kingdom impact, the community's got to be the center. And then if we think about what institutions operate, we can classify them into three main areas around that center. The public sector, the private sector, and the social sector. The private sector being businesses for income, where they're trying to make a profit. They give their jobs, but that's the private sector. All the businesses in that sector. You have the public sector or any kind of schools, public schools, any organization or institution is funded by taxes primarily. Okay. So that's a public sector.
Okay.
Social sector or nonprofits, churches, clubs. So if you think of a church as an institution, the church is the only institution that can make the greatest impact on community, because all around that circle you have Christ followers or agents all around that circle. I mean, you have Christ followers that own businesses or work at places. You have Christ followers that are teachers. You have Christ followers that are policemen. You have Christ followers that volunteer or work in nonprofits, all these kind of things. I think one of the things that interests me now is going, okay, I need to make sure I know who are those agents all around the circle. Who are the influencers in that? And then what's the cause that pulls everyone together?
Yeah.
In impacting the community.
Interesting.
So
Interesting.
That's what we've done in the past is, and this is typical, I would have an idea, we'd have an idea and going, okay, we're going to do a school serve, we go and beautify the school. Well, then I'll go to a coffee place, say, can you provide the coffee for this cause? Okay, schools, can you do this? Okay, pretty much that still puts the church as a center, thinking about community. So we're thinking, what's the community need for the greatest kingdom impact, and how do churches as institutions are part of that? And then how do Christ followers influence the movement towards making an impact on that community?
I love that.
So we're in the middle of that right now and trying to develop what does that look like.
Yeah.
And I think right now is the time for that. The need is great. And like I said before, I'd rather be known for what we're for than what we're against.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that we're for.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially now, I mean, again, there's so many challenges. There's so many questions with the whole COVID. However, there's a lot of opportunities.
Yeah.
We're all facing this, and again, you touched on it, just what, in my mind, those who are going through the greatest challenge right now are the schools and the decisions they have to make. And, and it's not necessarily churches or the businesses or things like that. Or places like that. It's the school systems, and those administrators, those teachers, they're having tremendous weight and burden when a student or a couple of students test positive. What do you do with that? How do you handle that? And so, all that to say is there is a definitive rallying cry for those, the private, public, and social sectors to kind of come around and rally around and work together on that, hopefully produces some pretty cool long-standing relationships, on the other side of this. And so as we're sitting here in the same room together, you kind of drew up this picture kind of with a circle with the peace sign in those three different sectors. And just that picture, I love that. I love what you guys are thinking and dreaming of, and the work you're chasing after. And
I think one of the things we have to just be realistic. We're all from different cultures. When we started working with schools, was a long time. I mean, it was about 10 years ago. So the trust factor just takes a long time. Absolutely. So I would hate to present something that it becomes discouraging to leaders that say, "Oh, we're starting this track." It just takes time.
Yeah.
I think part of the journey is giving yourself grace and giving your organization, giving your church grace as you move forward. It's one step at a time. It's not everything.
Yeah.
So there might be a place where, this has taken me 3.5 years just to think through some of this stuff. And we're not even there yet.
Yeah.
I just feel like
Yeah.
we're just starting.
Yep.
So I think the hard part of listening to a podcast that says, "Oh, well, this is overwhelming," is I would just encourage to step back and say, "Don't let it be. Just take one step.
Yeah.
What movement
Yeah.
going to take, and not feel like I need to do everything because it's just not going to happen." And again, how do you associate? How do you innovate in your culture? It's very different than how we innovate in Bellingham.
Sure. But you provided a great example and framework, and I so appreciate you sharing this. The name of our podcast is A World of Good Podcast. And so we often like to end our interviews or conversations with the question, what good is God doing in your world? Maybe and you've kind of shared a few different stories, but maybe there's another story or something that you would be able to share.
I just joined the middle school team, so last night I led a 8th grade boys small group. As part of the bigger event where they, there was a teaching and they play some games. Of course, it's middle school. It was just fun. I was overwhelmed with my small group. And I had one boy that just shared about his dad, basically abandoned them. And he had anger for a few years, and now he's learning to forgive. 8th grade boy.
Wow.
Leading the way. And I had another kid that was just sharing about that he would not be surprised if he finds out his mom ODs. So just drug issues with her mom, and his dad is the stable one. And when I think about those kind of conversations, I can think of strategy and all this kind of stuff. It's good. Some of that strategy stuff puts me at a distance.
Yeah.
It's only when strategy is incorporated with this closeness of pain and discussion and life, and it's this kind of connection. Well, when I think about the last week, what's the most important thing I did? I think this last night was the most important thing. Is being there for those 4 kids, 8th graders, 8th grade boys in my group, and hearing their story. And it's just messy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just
it
messy.
It is.
And I don't have all the answers.
Yep.
But they need someone that they trust, that's for them, that's just present, not someone that has all the answers. So I just think, strategy is one thing, innovation is one thing, but if it doesn't really impact lives, what good is it?
Yeah.
So absolutely. I think that would be my answer. Is
absolutely
last night. It's
that's
fresh
awesome.
in my mind.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that, and thanks for again being with us and kind of helping us to unpack a little bit of what you and your staff and team at Cornwall are going through and thinking through. I think this will be a great benefit and a different way to process what a lot of churches are experiencing right now, in a framework to help process. So thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to A World of Good. A World of Good is a podcast production of Global Strategy and Church of God Ministries. Our theme song is Colorado by Leo Flores. If you want to join the conversation, visit us at Twitter at A World of Good Pod, on Instagram, A World of Good Podcast, or visit our website, chogglobal.org/A World of Good. And join us next time as we share more stories of good from around the world.